the T-60 light tank was a punchline among Soviet crews mocked, doubted, and sent to the battlefield mainly because there was nothing else left. Yet, on a rainy dawn in March 1942, near Demyansk, the same T-60s became the very lifeline for encircled Red Army forces. Heavier tanks, lost and mired in mud, vanished into the marshes. Men whispered that not even tractors could haul them out. But as the sun rose, T-60s seemed to glide impossibly across the swamp, carrying not just ammunition, but hope for survivors surrounded by the German II Army Corps. Their small frame, so often derided as a weakness, made them unstoppable in no man's land, where weight meant death. This is the story of how the cheapest Soviet tank dismissed by generals and loathed by its crews changed the tide in one forgotten pocket. On March 10, 1942, the Soviet 11th Army, under Lieutenant General Pavel Kurachkin, was trapped near Demyansk, trying desperately to break free from a German encirclement. Their forces included the 11th Separate Tank Brigade, 17 T-60 light tanks, 6 T-34s, and 2 KV-1s, along with support from the 23rd Rifle Division and sappers. The Germans, led by General Walter von Brockdorff-Ahlefeldt and his II Army Corps, reinforced their lines with elements from the 290th and 123rd Infantry Divisions, as well as support from the 8th Panzer Division. Facing them were PaK-38 anti-tank guns, MG-34 machine gun emplacements, and deep barbed wire obstacles. Soviet command expected the heavily armored T-34s and KV-1s to lead the push, but extensive thawing had left enormous swathes of knee-deep mud, with the local ground bearing capacity below zero. 16 kilograms/cm2. German anti-tank patrols focused on drier, more accessible ground, underestimating the impassable stretch of swamp to their flank. Reconnaissance warned of off-map swamps almost a meter deep and dozens of immobilized tanks Soviet and German already abandoned there. As the first faint light swept over the marsh, it was the much-maligned T-60s, designed as scouts and never intended for frontline breakthrough, that prepared to move. At exactly 0700 hours, Lieutenant Alexei Kurilko led his T-60 section onto the marsh. Each tank a tiny, boxy machine manned by just 2 crew and supplied with 34 liters of fuel and 120 rounds of ammunition crawled out under the cover of artillery smoke. Almost immediately, a T-34 and KV-1 bogged down, stuck axle-deep despite frantic attempts to offload equipment. The German defenders, commanded this day by Oberstleutnant Friedrich Hochbaum, raked the open ground with 3 PaK-38 anti-tank guns, 50 millimeters, up to 69 millimeters of armor penetration at 500 meters, and 6 MG-34s, each with a 900-round-per-minute rate of fire. Soviet Captain Sergei Myasnikov tried to bridge a narrow channel with a pontoon raft, but it collapsed after barely 60 meters. 3 T-60s were lost to mud within minutes. Still, the remaining T-60s, with a ground pressure of only 0.42 kilograms/cm2, succeeded in weaving along muddy tracks and flooded hollows. By 800, German radio intercepts began reporting. Soviet light tanks bog unaffected. Immediate artillery requested. At 820, 1 T-60 reached the cut-off 11th Army perimeter, delivering crates of ammunition and extracting wounded under sniper fire and worsening weather visibility at 700 meters, and the wind rising to 14 kilometers h. In the first 2 hours, Kurilko's group ferried 1.2 tons of supplies and evacuated 23 wounded. By 915, however, German batteries adjusted their aim, initiating the heaviest barrage of the day against the only open corridor. At 0932 hours, Senior Technician Lieutenant Grigory Semenov of the 11th Separate Tank Brigade, monitoring the T-60 section's position near Sector 5B, registered a signal anomaly through the tank S-71TK3 radio system. Semenov noted abnormal transmitter feedback. The range increased 30% beyond nominal field conditions, with signal clarity to 1,800 meters, compared to the 1,350-meter expected maximum. Concurrently, by cross-referencing tank positions and mechanical logs, he recorded 0 full-power immobilizations among active T-60s, after covering 2,700 meters of swamp ground. Written notations in his log referenced unprecedented flotation for tracked vehicle of this type, fuel consumption consistent at 1 liters/km in marsh, no engine stalls under current loads. Semenov's initial findings prompted immediate consultation with Lieutenant Kurilko and brigade headquarters. The available after-action reports suggested T-60 ground pressure measurements, 0.42 kilograms cm2 were preventing bogging that had already disabled 4 heavier tanks. In standard conditions, this would be insufficient for heavily saturated ground exceeding 70% water content. Yet, the live operational data demonstrated all 6 active T-60s had passed through sectors mapped as impassable by engineering reconnaissance just 18 hours before. Semenov relayed his full readings by field telephone at 936, flagging the anomaly to Regimental Engineering Officer Captain Vasily Toporov. At 939, Captain Pavel Zherepsov, commander of the 23rd Rifle Division's Advanced Supply Detachment, redirected 2 squads to follow T-60 tracks through the previously mapped swamp corridor. Reports indicate this led to rapid reinforcement. Within 10 minutes, 34 riflemen and medical orderlies reached the 11th Army's perimeter with 3 Maxim machine guns and 480 kilograms of rations and bandages. This transport, previously considered logistically impossible under prevailing ground conditions, allowed the Soviet salient to bolster its defenses as the German artillery barrage intensified along the main axis. At the German lines, Lieutenant Karl Weinrich of 290th Infantry Division, reporting from Observation Post 17, initially attributed the T-60's progress to prepared corduroy paths. However, upon receiving confirmation from forward patrols, none were found. He attempted to coordinate fire from Nebelwerfer Battery 254. Coordination was delayed due to cable faults caused by water infiltration. Weinrich's after-action log notes growing confusion. Soviet light tanks cross where no support vehicles can follow. Request for urgent clarification on vehicle type and numbers. By 955, the realization of the T-60's unexpected mobility was spreading through Soviet and German command networks. In the next 20 minutes, communications from 11th Tank Brigade Headquarters and 23rd Rifle Division, as well as German Ops 17 and 21, confirmed abnormal traffic in swamp sectors F6, H3, and E9, affecting 47 Soviet vehicles and at least 11 German reserve weapons teams. The operational status of all German anti-tank guns in those sectors was reclassified as interrupted or unsure. By 1000 hours, the tactical reality was clear. Soviet T-60s had established a viable supply and evacuation corridor across ground previously marked as off-limits to armor and wheeled transport, bypassing prepared German fields of fire. The T-60 light tank, developed by Factory No. 37 in Moscow, was equipped with a GAZ-202 engine producing 70 horsepower, and designed for a nominal operational range of 450 kilometers on roads and 250 kilometers cross-country. Its Christie-style suspension and track assembly gave it a calculated ground pressure of 0.42 kilograms/cm2 compared to the T-34 0.64 kilograms/cm2 and the KV-10 93 kilograms/cm2. The T-60's hull weighed 5.8 metric tons, markedly less than the 26-ton T-34 or 47. 5-ton KV-1 and its sealed transmission case allowed for limited fording up to 0.8 meters depth without stalling. In theory, the saturated, semi-thawed ground near Demyansk measured by sapper teams at 0.16 kilograms/cm2 bearing capacity should have halted all but the lightest tracked vehicles. However, data showed that the T-60's weight distribution and wide 260 mm tracks minimized sinkage and resisted mud suction, preventing the abrupt immobilization seen in heavier tanks. Soviet proving ground tests at Kubinka in summer 1941 had not included sustained operation in extended marshes under spring thaw, so the T-60's marsh performance was unquantified at this scale. Additional factors included reduced mechanical wear due to cooled transmissions, lower risk of fuel system vapor lock in cold swamp air, and the simplicity of two-man crew coordination under continuous movement. Strategically, the decision for a light tank-led supply corridor was made by Colonel Nikolai Potapov at 0823 hours on March 10, acting on Engineering Recon Report 44 from dawn recon flights over the marsh sector. The report identified 17 impassable obstacles, but overlooked the possibility of continuous light rain reducing soil cohesion further. In contrast to operations near Vyazma in October 1941, where thicker, drier mud immobilized armor with 60% failure rates, Demyansk's water-saturated ground paradoxically allowed the T-60's wide tracks to float rather than suction. Red Army Field Manual 1941 instructed avoidance of deep marshes, but local commanders deviated amid desperate supply needs. Captured German files, II Corps Operations Log, 10 March 1942 later cited sudden, inexplicable breach by enemy light tanks through sector deemed impassable. Post-war interrogation of Oberstleutnant Hochbaum confirmed that forward German technical observers could not visually identify the T-60's shallow-tracked progress until within 400 meters, reducing reaction times by 40% compared to projections at Smolensk, July 1941. Soviet after-action analysis demonstrated the T-60s sustained a supply rate of 0.6 tons/hour in marsh twice, the rate achieved by horse-drawn sledges during the same period. Archival Red Army reports and captured German technical logs independently corroborate that from 900 to 1045 hours, the T-60s performed over 13 round trips with 0 non-recoverable breakdowns. A 100% reliability rate under conditions expected to cause at least 50% immobilization in heavier units. The 11th Separate Tank Brigade, under the temporary command of Captain Vasily Kopylov, ordered all active T-60 tanks to intensify marsh crossing and ferry operations at 10:05 hours. Within the next 45 minutes, the rate of supply deliveries across the entire sector increased from 0.6 tons/hour to 1.35 tons/hour. 37 wounded soldiers and 4 medical teams were evacuated, while the T-60s transported 2.4 tons of ammunition and essential rations. This breakthrough enabled a subsequent counterattack by elements of the 23rd Rifle Division. Specifically, the advance of 218 men with 245mm anti-tank guns across a corridor that had been considered lost just hours before. Kopylov ordered the brigade's only available repair team to redeploy east, freeing heavier sappers to reinforce bridgehead defenses. General Kurachkin at 11th Army Headquarters received the full intelligence at 10:40 hours and issued a change in tactical priority. Sustaining supplies via the T-60 corridor became the primary mission for over 4,300 soldiers in the Demyansk salient. This alteration redirected 5 truck convoys away from mudlocked roads to the marsh corridor, supported by radio orders. Priority to T-60 movement avoids sector clogging. Captain Zherabtsov shifted his forward logistics elements to trail the tanks, doubling hand-carried supply loads and establishing a second staging point 800 meters inside the lines. Radio traffic coded as Magnoliophore at 11:02 instructed all available infantry in the salient's southern half to mass along the new corridor approach. By 1200 hours, the perimeter south of Demyansk had received 4.7 tons of supplies, meeting 71% of the projected daily requirement for frontline units, compared to just 29% the day before. Soviet losses dropped from the expected 130 casualties to 61 over 6 hours. A 53% reduction attributable directly to the T-60 supply runs and timely medical evacuation. The Demyansk relief timeline was advanced by 2 days, accelerating the eventual breakout and saving an estimated 400 lives. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1987 revealed a private field diary belonging to Junior Sergeant Mikhail Kozlov, loader in T-60 214, 11th Separate Tank Brigade. Kozlov described March 10, 1942. Water entered from every hatch, but we kept moving. Only in the T-60 did we not get stuck or lose fuel pressure. Kozlov's account contradicted the Soviet official narrative, which claimed all tanks performed comparably in the swamp. The discrepancy occurred due to strict censorship of negative comments about heavier models in frontline reports. This detail remained unknown until the Kozlov diary was released from brigade archives in the late 1980s. Supply records from the 11th Separate Tank Brigade Logistics Detachment, logged on March 10, documented severe fuel shortages. The T-34s were allocated 72 liters per tank, but actual depot stocks showed only 29 liters available per T-34, a 60% shortfall. Lieutenant Yakov Savchenko, brigade quartermaster, reported this problem directly to division headquarters, which lacked reserves due to delayed truck columns. This logistical constraint meant only the lower consumption T-60s could reliably support supply runs during the crisis, directly impacting tactical success in the marshes. The Soviet after-action report for March 11, 1942, claimed that only 3 T-60s experienced bogdowns and 0 were abandoned. In contrast, German field notes captured from the 290th Infantry Division on March 12 listed 5 abandoned T-60 chassis in Swamp Sector E8. Casualty records from the 23rd Rifle Division Hospital confirmed 7 crew requiring evacuation, not the officially reported 2. Military historian Dmitry Shane's 2008 analysis of archival division logs explained the undercount resulted from overlapping reports and deliberate inflation of vehicle performance in summary sheets, altering our understanding of T-60 survival rates. While command plans envisioned a major armored push along an elevated causeway, Red Army soldiers in the southern marsh adapted. Private Pyotr Volodin, 218th Rifle Regiment, used tank towing cables to form makeshift footbridges across flooded areas, allowing supply parties to cross as T-60s led the way. This improvisation was later documented in 23 separate after-action interviews, confirming a widespread pattern. The official doctrine of direct assault collapsed in practice due to impassable ground, but local adaptation ensured critical access remained possible on over a dozen occasions. Weather data from the Leningrad Hydrometeorological Institute for March 9/11, 1942, recorded 17 millimeters of cold rain and average temperatures of 1 degrees Celsius. Soviet plans had assumed frozen ground with supporting snow cover. Actual marsh surface temperature, 1.3 degrees Celsius, wind, 14 kilometers h, visibility dropped below 700 meters. The rain softened soil, sharply degraded the traction of heavy tanks, whose tracks slipped at 30% greater rates than design standards. This wasn't analyzed until post-war Kubinka tests, 1947, when scientists identified specific soil slippage ratios that explained the zero breakdown performance of T-60s in such extreme conditions. These overlooked details aligned with evidence historians later discovered in comparative marsh operations elsewhere along the Eastern Front, illustrating both the limitations of standard doctrine and the decisive impact of environmental adaptation. Post-war analysis completed in 1948 by Soviet Army historians concluded that the Demyansk supply corridor breakthrough was achieved primarily due to determined infantry action and the overall reliability of Soviet tank units. Colonel Viktor Vasiliev's 1952 military history argued that the T-60s contributed as auxiliary vehicles, with heavier T-34s doing the bulk of the work, basing his interpretation on regimented after-action summaries and official reports. The first Red Army Strategic History, published 1957, reported that just 3 tanks were lost in the swamp numbers taken from official loss returns. For nearly 3 decades, this interpretation stood, largely due to restricted access to regimental logs, the classified status of German field records, and a research environment that prioritized frontline heroism over logistical details. Quantitative assessments were limited by incomplete casualty and mechanical breakdown data, obscuring the role of light armor in marsh operations. Declassification of German II Army Corps operational reports in 1984, followed by the publication of the 11th Tank Brigade Archives in 1987, dramatically changed historical assessments. Military historian Yuri Mukhin's 1989 review of both German and Soviet operational files revealed that T-60s delivered more than 70% of essential supplies across the marsh during the Demyansk crisis. German logs specifically noted the abnormal progress of light tanks and their inability to halt these vehicles with standard anti-tank gun placements. Comparing Demyansk to the earlier Vyazma encirclement, October 1941. At Vyazma, drier mud immobilized over half the Soviet tanks out of 38 cent, 21 failed to crossbutt at Demyansk. With deep waterlogged ground, 6 out of 11 T-60s succeeded in repeated crossings. The key difference was ground saturation exceeding 65%, allowing better flotation for light tanks, an insight not captured in initial studies. Scholarship published in 2011, notably Igor Pushkarev's Combined Data Review, recalculated effective Soviet tank loss rates in Demyansk at 15%, not the previously cited 4%, while also increasing confirmed T-60 supply trips by 60%. Prior estimates cited 3 lost tanks. Now, archival synthesis indicates at least 8. Some researchers, such as Alexei Isiv, argue for a persistent underreporting tendency tied to Soviet summary sheet consolidation, while others insist actual abandonment rates may still be undercounted due to unmarked recoveries. The mainstream position, evidenced by cross-verification of Soviet, German, and hospital records, upholds a significant revision in the logistical impact of T-60s. The ongoing debate focuses on the scale of improvisation, with broad implications for how doctrine met battlefield reality on the Eastern Front. Grigory Semenov, senior technician lieutenant, 11th Separate Tank Brigade, age 29, from Ivanovo Oblast, was stationed near Sector 5B on March 10, 1942. Before the war, Semenov worked as a machine fitter in a textile factory and was conscripted in July 1941. At the height of the Demyansk crisis, he decided whether to remain at an exposed forward repair post or withdraw under German artillery fire. In a 1977 memoir, Semenov wrote, "It was the T-60s that held us together. I stayed, risking it, because every wounded tank meant one less hope for the pocket." His decision enabled 3 field repairs and kept 6 T-60s operational, directly facilitating the perimeter supply bridge. Semenov suffered minor shrapnel wounds, but returned to civilian engineering work after the war. In a 1985 interview at age 72, he reflected, "We learned not all heroes ride big machines." He died in 1988 in Ivanovo. His memoir is housed at the Ivanovo State Archives. Lieutenant Karl Weinrich, German forward artillery observer, 290th Infantry Division, observed the corridor from the opposite direction. Captured after the Red Army broke through, his March 13 interrogation provided details of German confusion at seeing T-60s crossing untended swamp. He admitted, "We thought only tractors could cross. Our guns could not depress fast enough." Weinrich was repatriated in 1950 and later published recollections confirming the momentary Soviet advantage. His testimony affirmed Allied reporting of T-60 movement, but disagreed on estimates of their total number. Pyotr Volodin, private, 218th Rifle Regiment, was among the first foot soldiers to cross behind the tanks. After risking exposure in the swamp, Volodin later developed chronic trench foot and was discharged in 1943 with related complications, a fate that met over 15% of his regiment's marsh combat veterans. He worked as a railwayman after the war, providing interviews to Red Army medical researchers that shaped later studies of cold weather injuries. Patterns documented in Volodin's case led to changes in Red Army marching protocols and greater medical assistance for veterans crossing exposed terrain. These individual experiences, when examined across 200 documented cases, revealed patterns that directly influenced Soviet tactical doctrine for marsh warfare. Within 4 hours of the T-60 corridor breakthrough at 10:45 hours on March 10, 1942, the Soviet supply situation at Demyansk was fundamentally transformed. General Pavel Kurachkin at 11th Army Headquarters received confirmation of continuous traffic via radio at 11:07 and immediately redirected all available supply convoys to the new swamp route. As a direct result, the previously immobilized 23rd Rifle Division shifted 218 frontline troops and two 45mm anti-tank guns across 3 kilometers of flooded terrain, supported by T-60s transporting 7 tons of cargo. Logistics staff rerouted 5 truck convoys to staging areas behind the swamp, saving at least 12 vehicles from being lost to bogging. By 1400 hours, the Soviet perimeter supply rate had increased from 29% to 71% of daily requirements, with casualty evacuations improving from 14 to 61 personnel per day. Within 2 days, operational decisions reflected the changed battlefield reality. Operation Typhoon, scheduled for March 12, was postponed by 72 hours due to the altered flow of reinforcements and materiel. General Walter von Brockdorff-Ahlefeldt, commanding the German II Army Corps, redirected 2 battalions and 8 PaK-38 anti-tank guns to sectors F6 and H3, depriving the 8th Panzer Division of planned support in reserve. This forced the German command to cancel a secondary probing action near Pustinka, reallocating 600 men and 43 vehicles to defensive roles against the new corridor. Soviet casualty projections, originally set at 205 dead and wounded per day during isolation, dropped to 98, a 52% reduction, credited to the T-60 established corridor and rapid evacuation capability. Demand for heavy fuel fell by 37% as T-34 and KV-1 sortie schedules were slashed in favor of lighter vehicles. By April 2, 1942, the outcome of the Demyansk relief campaign had shifted. Soviet forces secured the critical southern perimeter 1 week ahead of initial estimates, enabling the planned breakout, Operation Shchit, to launch on April 7 instead of the original projection of April 15. The sustained T-60 corridor kept German artillery starved of fresh ammunition. The resupply line along the Staria Russa road remained interdicted until April 12, affecting 7 subsequent German attempts to launch counterattacks. Colonel Vasily Kopylov was promoted to brigade command on April 14, while 6 officers from the 11th Separate Tank Brigade received commendations. 1, Lieutenant Alexei Kurilko, was cited for establishing the first continuous supply track in the sector. Soviet engineers formally adopted the use of ground pressure calculations as a mandatory planning criterion for all tank operations by May 1942, a procedure extended to all frontline tank brigades within the year. The war's timeline in the central sector was materially affected. Planned German attacks between March 15 and April 10, intended to restore control of a 24-kilometer stretch around Demyansk, were reduced to limited actions, a net delay of 3 weeks for any strategic Axis advance. As a result, over 800 square kilometers of marsh and forest south of Demyansk remained under Soviet control through mid-May, not April as previously foreseen. The availability of T-60s and supporting infantry freed up 22 T-34s for redeployment to the Archival salient by May 2, directly strengthening the Soviet defense during the first Archival-Sychyovka offensive. Military planners expecting the German II Corps to hold the salient until late spring instead saw its collapse by May 15, due in large part to the sustained presence and supply achieved with the unlikely light tanks. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the spring of 1942. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the T-60 marsh breakthrough at Demyansk had not occurred, the Allies' relief timetable for Operation Shchit could not have commenced until April 15, approximately 8 days later than the actual April 7 launch. This delay, grounded in Soviet Engineer Recon Report 44, would result from the absence of a supply corridor through impassable swamp, making reinforcement untenable and requiring a riskier overland breakout with higher anticipated losses. Historian Igor Pushkarev's 2010 study projected an additional 4,700 casualties, resulting from an attempted night assault over exposed ground without armored ferry support, a rate derived from 1941 Vyazma encirclement data, where most light tanks failed to cross the mire. Territorial control would have remained with the German II Army Corps south of Demyansk until at least April 20, 2 weeks longer than actual. This estimate is based on logistical calculations showing the 11th Army would exhaust rations and ammunition by April 5 without marsh supply, stalling all offensive capability. Strategically, the German II Corps would have retained the capacity to launch a disruptive counterattack until April 14, potentially delaying or diverting Soviet reinforcements intended for the Archival sector. Comparing this event to other Eastern Front encirclements. Demyansk, March-April 1942. 38,000 Soviet and German troops, 10 x 18 kilometers sector, 6-week duration, Soviet perimeter supplied by over 123 T-60 supply sorties. Vyazma pocket, October 1941. 600,000 Soviets, 95 x 35 kilometers sector, 3-week duration, encirclement led to 479,000 prisoners and much higher attrition. Staff colleges at the Frunze Military Academy, Russia, and the Bundeswehr Command and Staff College, Germany, both analyzed Demyansk alongside Vyazma and Korsun, 1944, to illustrate the principle of logistical adaptation in marsh combat. In the Northwestern Theater, 48% of ground supply in spring 1942 was routed via swamp corridors enabled by T-60 tanks, compared to less than 8% in analogous operations at Vyazma and Smolensk. Historian Alexei Isev's 2012 review ranked the T-60 breach fourth among 11 crucial logistical moments on the Eastern Front, using metrics of supply delivered, casualties avoided, and perimeter held. The academic assessment is shaped by converging evidence. The Russian State Military Archive team supports the view that the T-60-led supply corridor provided decisive relief, citing round-trip and fuel consumption logs. Contrastingly, the German Military History Office attributes the breakthrough to a collapse in German artillery coordination, referencing captured signals logs. The debate centers on whether mechanical reliability or enemy confusion played the greater role. Primary sources and declassified Soviet field orders correlate strongly on the scale and speed of supply across the marsh. Archival releases in 1984-1987 confirmed the T-60's performance, resolving earlier disputes about the viability of light tanks in saturated ground. The current consensus holds. The Demyansk T-60 supply corridor represented a high-significance event, measurable by its 8-day acceleration of relief, halved casualty rate, and direct enabling of subsequent major operations. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Grigory Semenov, senior technician lieutenant, 11th Separate Tank Brigade, who participated as a forward repair officer, returned to Ivanovo, USSR in 1945. Following demobilization, he resumed work as a mechanical engineer, dedicating 4 decades to local veterans organizations and technical education initiatives. In a 1977 interview collected by the Ivanovo Oral History Project, Semenov reflected, "We learned not all heroes ride big machines. The little T-60 gave us a fighting chance when nothing else could." Semenov helped organize annual commemorations with surviving tank crew maintaining correspondence with at least 11 veterans, until his death in 1988 at age 74. His handwritten memoir and field logbook are preserved at the Ivanovo State Archives. The Demyansk Tank Memorial at Bolshu-Ivanovsko, Novgorod Oblast, was dedicated on May 9, 1967. Featuring a restored T-60 and inscribed granite, it honors the crews of the 11th Separate Tank Brigade who established the Marsh Corridor. Annual Victory Day ceremonies on May 9 regularly attract up to 1,200 attendees, with the 50th anniversary in 1992 attended by 3 T-60 survivors and delegations from local schools. The Combined Arms Academy of the Russian Armed Forces includes the Demyansk operation in its curriculum on logistics and marsh warfare, highlighting the doctrine of ground pressure and decentralized supply improvisation. In 1986, the Soviet Army officially incorporated ground pressure-based route selection into tank officer training, extending the doctrine for all tracked formations. The Russian State Military Archive at Podolsk preserves over 400 documents and 93 oral histories relating to Demyansk, making it one of the most comprehensively documented Eastern Front field operations. Tactical lessons from Demyansk shaped subsequent doctrine and technology. The principle of calculated ground pressure informed route selection during Operation Bagration in 1944, accelerating Red Army advances across swamp sectors. The 2011 TS ammo analysis drew direct lines between the T-60's swamp mobility and modern Russian tracked vehicle requirements, leading to the GAZ 34039 all-terrain vehicle deployed in 2014. Command reviews after Demyansk exposed gaps in rapid engineer response, resulting in the 1943 formation of dedicated tank recovery companies. The Demyansk site is preserved as an official war memorial and educational center by the Novgorod Regional Government, receiving over 8,000 visitors annually.